Ken Paxton is touring Texas, telling voters about Republicans who are helping Democrats. This is Friday, January 3rd, 2025.
Texas Scorecard presents the day's first news for the Lone Star State, the Texas Minute, with your host, Michael Quinn Sullivan.
Thanks for starting the end of your week with the Texas Minute. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is blasting the FBI's response to the terror attack in New Orleans. More on that coming up. Republican State Representative Brian Harrison of Midlothian has said he'll file legislation to defund the Texas Medical Board if they don't terminate one of the agency's top bureaucrats. Earlier this week, it was reported that TMB's medical director, Dr. Robert Brett, had worked for Planned Parenthood of South Texas since 2011, a year before getting his job with TMB in 2012. His position with TMB pays $185,000 annually, and he's holding both positions simultaneously. Following the revelation, Republican State Representative Briscoe Cain of Deer Park sent a letter to the TMB to terminate Brett's employment immediately. Now, Mr. Harrison has promised to file legislation to cut all funding to the Texas Medical Board if Brett isn't terminated. TMB is receiving $44 million in taxpayer funding in the current biennial budget. The Texas Supreme Court has dismissed a protracted and controversial attempt by the State Bar of Texas to discipline the leadership at the Office of the Attorney General because the State Bar didn't like a lawsuit that the Attorney General brought. The ruling puts to an end what the OAG described as 4 years of lawfare and political retaliation surrounding actions taken by Attorney General Ken Paxton and First Assistant Brent Webster related to the 2020 election. The case stems from a lawsuit filed by the Texas State Bar, which sought to impose sanctions against Paxton and Webster over their involvement in a lawsuit challenging the validity of the 2020 election. You'll recall that Texas versus Pennsylvania was filed at the U.S. Supreme Court in December of 2020 alongside a coalition of 18 states. That coalition of states were questioning the voting mechanisms in several states and aimed to temporarily halt those states from certifying vote counts ahead of the Electoral College meeting. Their case was denied, at which point the State Bar began to pursue sanctions against Webster and Paxton. Now the Supreme Court has held that the court cannot continue their frivolous and partisan actions. Speaking of Attorney General Ken Paxton, he's hitting the road, holding a series of events in the coming days to place a spotlight on the ongoing battle to retain Republican control of the speakership of the Texas House. Last month, Republican State Representative David Cook of Mansfield won the GOP nomination for Speaker, but that hasn't stopped State Representative Dustin Burrows of Lubbock and a minority of other Republican members from attempting to create a coalition with Democrats in order to win the gavel when the legislature convenes later this month. Paxton will be joined on this tour by Republican Party of Texas Chairman Abraham George in visiting the districts of members they say are undermining the Republican Party by cutting deals with Democrats. The Texas Minute will be right back.
The odds of winning the lottery are already slim.
Get ready to play the games of Texas.
But in 2023, with the third largest jackpot on the line, it became nearly impossible for the average Texan to win. It turns out, it's hard to compete against an international gambling syndicate buying up $25 million worth of tickets. How did they pull it off? You might be shocked to learn with the help of the Lottery Commission itself. That's just one of the stories we're uncovering in Season 9 of Exposed. We're pulling back the curtain on the rigged games, political corruption, and corporate scandals that have plagued the Texas Lottery for years. Listen to Exposed, Gateway Drug, and discover the truth behind the numbers.
Exposed, Season 9. Episodes available January 7th.
Despite overwhelming evidence, the FBI special agent in charge in New Orleans has said that the New Year's Day attack there was not an act of terrorism, leading Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick to call for her termination. The perpetrator has been ID'd as 42-year-old Shamsuddin Jabbar of Houston. He plowed his truck through a crowd of people celebrating New Year's Day before getting out and firing a weapon at bystanders and police. Among the items recovered in Jabbar's rented vehicle was a flag used by the terrorist group ISIS. Although multiple improvised explosive devices were discovered after the attack, the FBI's Aletha Duncan said that it was, quote, not a terrorist event. Patrick described that response as, quote, idiotic. He and Governor Greg Abbott have said that they're working with law enforcement officials in Texas to ensure the danger has been contained. You can find the details of all the stories mentioned today and keep up with the latest news by visiting TexasScorecard.com. This edition of the Texas Minute was based on the original reporting of Emily Madero, Sidney Henry, Brandon Waltons, and Will Biagini. He was produced by Nick Shepard in the 1836 studios. I look forward to seeing you out around the Lone Star State. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for listening to the first news of the day for the Lone Star State. This has been the Texas Minute with your host, Michael Quinn Sullivan.